Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of K6 Office Hours. As always, I'm Marie and I'm one of your dev girls here at K6. And today I have a lot of people here with me today. So why don't we start off with, so I can see my screen. So I think it's pointing to Nicole.
Hi, I'm Nicole van der Hoeven. As always, I'm one of the DevRels here, and I'm here to provide color commentary and ask the questions that people don't ask because I don't know about what we're talking about, and I'm curious to learn more. We
Yeah.
also
So,
have two
yeah.
people who do know quite a bit more than I do. Ankur, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Ankur. I'm a software engineer here at Grafana K6. I'm working on the browser module. That's me.
Yeah, should I go?
Yeah. Yeah,
So
Danielle,
yeah,
go for it.
hello. Hello, I'm Danny. I'm a software engineer at Grafana, and also I mainly work on K6 browser.
Nice. So Daniel, so this is the first time for both Daniel and Anchor. So Nicole and I promised that we're gonna be gentle today in terms of like the
Wait, I didn't
questions.
promise that.
You did? But I think yeah, so this, episode is going to be, so we've actually dedicated an entire episode for all the different changes that are coming to K6 browser because there's quite a lot. But before that, why don't we go and mention any announcements from our side? So Nicole, do you wanna go first?
Yes. So the big thing that I want to talk about is that K6 Office Hours is going to be merged in with Grafana Office Hours. If you don't know, I mean, I don't know whether you're watching this on the Grafana channel right now or on the K6 channel. We are currently streaming to both. If you don't already know, we were acquired by Grafana a few years ago, and we are just now starting to transition things over. We are going to eventually consolidate it into one sort of office hour show. It'll be the same people pretty much, and we will still talk about K6, but it also gives us room to talk about other things in the Grafana stack. So eventually, we will also be moving things over from the K6 channel to the Grafana one. So you might as well head over there if you're not already there and subscribe to us over there to keep up with what's happening. But for the meantime, we will be streaming to both locations. So not much is changing in terms of the content, but probably there'll be some branding changes.
Nice. And then just from my side, so one of our colleague, Theo, so he actually spoke with us as well a few times at K6 Office Hours. So they just published a new blog around, understanding Grafana K6. So he really explained, for example, on, what K6 is all about from both a user perspective as well as from like the technical perspective as well. So if you're interested to know how K6 works under the hood, how we're able to run your tests and, collect all the data that you need, then have a look at this blog post, which is already linked on the video description down below. And we've already mentioned this on previous K6 office hours, but it's worth mentioning again. So K6 is going to be a partner at the TESMU conference. So this is going to be on the 22nd to the 24th of August. I'll be there. So I'm actually going to be doing a talk about a hybrid approach to performance testing. And then some of our other colleagues like Paul, Leandro, Pepe, and our community support engineer Ima will be there to assist us in the virtual booth. So if you have any questions around K6 or you just want to come and talk to us, again the link is added on the description below. So this is for free, by the way. So it's free to register. And yeah, I think that's all the announcement. Before we dive into the topic, so I know Daniel and Ankur, you've briefly introduced yourself. Maybe we can expand more on that introduction. What exactly is it that you do here at K6? So maybe Daniel, you can start first.
Yeah, well, as I said, I mainly work on K6 browser, which is an extension of K6 that allows to do front-end based testing. And yeah, those are my main duties, I would say.
Yeah. How
How
long have
long
you
have you
been at?
been?
Yeah.
I've been here since January, beginning of January of this year. So yes, 8 months, a little bit over 8 months.
So you're the most you're the most recent graphanista here amongst us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you talk about the K6 browser as part of your week of load testing? I can't remember.
Yeah, a little bit because I knew I was gonna work on it, so a little bit of the focus was on K6 browser. Yeah.
Nice. And how about you, Ankur?
Yeah, very similar to Daniel. So me and Daniel work on the same team. So it's our main duties are looking at browser module for K6. We've got a lot of new things coming up, and I'm quite excited about this current release.
Yeah.
We've been working for quite a few months on this. But yeah, it is really fun. It's quite exciting. I'm looking forward to the feedback from the community. I think
Yeah.
we've been waiting for a long time for this, so it'll be great.
Yeah, because I guess yeah, like we can maybe start. So if I make maybe some people are aware, some people are not. Like we've just actually reached the milestone of releasing K6 browser in terms of the versioning. Like it hit like version 1, like 1.0. And in terms of like one of the breaking changes, we've now sort of introduced this one virtual user per one browser context. To people who don't know what that sort of mapping is, could maybe one of you just talk more about why we've introduced that change, like why we only have one browser context now per one virtual user, and why have we changed that?
Yeah. So there are various reasons for this, but the main reason is that, as Ankur said, we have been working on adding support for browser tests in the cloud, and we needed to have a better understanding or a reliable and better understanding of how many resources would a browser test require in the cloud, mainly in relation to the browser instances that we already run. Um, and in this case, we were quantifying this in browser contexts, which are independent sessions in a browser instance. But the problem is that in the previous implementation, there was not a limit on how many browser contexts or how many browser instances a user could
Mm.
launch per iteration. And now we're moving into a model where we have we have constrained this, and now each iteration will represent an independent browser session in the browser instance, which means basically a browser context, right? And making this change, we also thought that it's a good step forward to make K6 browser fit more into the K6 APIs or the K6 way of doing things in a way.
Mhm.
Because now if you want to do if you want to have independent sessions for browser or do a set of independent actions, the way to organize it is to use different scenarios, which is already an element available in the K6 API. So yeah, the main motivation is reliable capacity planning, let's say, but we also think this makes it fit better into what K6 is.
So, can
Yeah.
we talk a bit about what it was before? Like, it used to be one thread is to one virtual user, is that right?
Well, the thing is that uh, in the previous implementation, you could define as many virtual users and as many iterations, but in each iteration, you were free to
Mm.
create n browser instances, and each browser instance you could create also an unlimited number of browser contexts, right? And this is what we thought that doesn't really match because also like if you most users in the end will just use a single browser instance per iteration, or most probably a single browser context. So we have decided to make this change because we think it's more constrained in a way, but you have tools to do the same things you did before. and we think it fits better.
Yeah. I think like it that change really makes sense because especially if we are starting to integrate K6 browser in the cloud. If we don't have that limit, like you said, it's going to be difficult to sort of plan ahead, like, oh, how many like browser instances we have to allocate per per this test. Because if an iteration can just open up like how many browser contexts, then in terms of like the I guess the allocation planning, and we don't know as well in terms of like the cost side, like how that will have an impact. So I think having that limit makes sense. And it's interesting because maybe when other users, they might have a different way of like opening up, or like if they want to run tests concurrently. Like I think from my side, I would definitely use scenarios for that, maybe because I'm more used into that sort of thinking. But maybe for other people, if they have a single test, they might think, oh, I'll just open up another context, or like another like browser for this as part of my one test. But actually it makes more sense if you have like a different test for that, and then you can run that concurrently using scenarios. So I think overall it does make sense.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm actually surprised about it because this is always how I used K6 browser. Because it never really occurred to me to have multiple browser contexts in the same VU. And I think part of it is the repeatability that we've mentioned already. I might write a test and run it, but then if I pass it over to Marie, she might not necessarily know how I did things. And for us to be able to both write and run tests and still have them be comparable to each other, there has to be some sort of consistency. And the other thing that I was thinking of is that I think this also represents a very opinionated idea on our part of how browser tests should be run. There are situations where browser tests can make really good load tests, but there isn't. We also have to leave room for the fact that if we're talking about efficiency, it's not the most efficient way to run it. If you have, thousands of users, maybe consider a hybrid approach. And I think that is this change is also part of that.
yeah. I think the opinionated argument is very much true, and I think this is more like a trend also. I think initially when Casing Browser started, and I was not even here, but there was this, effort on trying to mimic the Playwright API, which made sense at the time. But I think now we're trying to make it more, opinionated, as you said, like fit it more into what K6 is or should be.
Yeah. So I guess from a user perspective, I guess if they already have a script, that they have, speaking of this one view, one browser context, like how does that actually look like to them? So maybe we can look at, some before and after comparison in terms of like script changes. That would be really
Mhm.
useful.
Yeah, I have just an example. So let me share the screen. Okay, can you see it now?
Maybe you can make it a bit bigger.
Yeah, like this, or maybe more.
Bit
Maybe a
more.
bit more. Yeah. Yeah. For me, yeah,
Or
that's
more.
this is okay.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So this is a fairly simple test. It's the same test, but with the two different implementations. So on the right, on the left, we have the old implementation of this test, and then on the right is the new implementation, and it highlights basically the differences. And if you want, we can go one by one, top to bottom, and discuss them.
Yeah. Yep. Top to bottom sounds good.
Yeah. Okay. So the first difference is the import. This is the previous implementation where a user would usually import this Chromium, which is the browser type implementation of the Chrome or Chromium browser. And then from here, it would basically launch the browser or connect to a browser instance, right? Now
Okay, I
on
have to
the
ask a question,
yeah,
Danny. Does this mean that you are looking into, cross-browser support?
at some point, yes. So the plan has always been to support other browsers, but at the moment we're only supporting Chrome or Chromium.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe I can add something to this as well, because I think like from our side, like the main priority is really just to focus on Chromium base support. In terms of cross browser, I have mixed feelings, but maybe that's another topic that we can discuss. But I think for me, the main importance in terms of user experience is like we have the most stable API, in terms of just giving it to like users who want to use Chromium, reach as much as compatibility as well as we can, because there's still a lot of APIs that maybe are missing. And then in the future, if we do want to look at cross browser, then yep, I think that's the time to do it. But I think for now, definitely just Chromium base.
Okay, yeah. So on the new version, then on the new version, what the user would do is import this browser, which already references the browser class. So the user no longer has to initialize the browser, which we will talk about later. And from this browser class, you already have access to all the browser components and methods, such as new page or new context. Right? Comments, questions?
Nope. None so far. Yeah, I think at the moment it's clear.
Okay. Then next step, which is a little bit trickier. If so, this is the previous implementation, right? But there is something here that we are not seeing, and is that on the previous implementation, we were requiring the user to set this environment variable, right? This K6 browser enable, which must have set to true to be able to run browser tests. It was an explicit requirement, and now the difference is that we are deprecating this environment variable, but we're replacing it with another field that you have to set, which is the browser type, right? And so then we have this new options field that is defined inside a scenarios definition, where you can define the browser options. And currently we basically support the type, which only Chromium is the valid value, but maybe in the future will be others. So yeah, I guess there will be some comments here. So comments.
Yeah. Is this a mandatory field that users will have to provide? Because you said that we're gonna be deprecating the K6 browser enabled environment variable. So is this gonna be something that they must do going forward?
Yeah, exactly. So they no longer have to set the environment variable, but they have to set this browser type field because it's the same explicit requirement that we wanted to have as an opt-in for running browser tests.
Yeah. How
So
about
I
the
guess
executor? Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, just for some context here, just for people who maybe don't know what we're talking about, I think right about the time when K6 browser went from being an extension, XK6 browser that needed to be compiled with the K6 core binary in order to be executed, and it became an experimental module, so you don't have to do all of that. I think at that time we also added this environment variable so that in order to run a K6 browser test script, you also have to put K6 browser enabled equals true. And I believe that when we were discussing this was primarily a security reason, right? We did this because there are all sorts of things that you can do with K6 browser, including taking screenshots of potentially sensitive information. Um, Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was primarily why we added that flag, right?
Yeah, that.
Yes.
Oh, go on,
Go,
Daniel.
go, go on.
Yeah, that's exactly why we. So we, yeah, because basically we didn't want a situation where someone who's been working with K6 comes across like a new browser enabled K6 script and just copy pastes it, and then it's surprised to see like their Chrome browser suddenly pop up and start doing some things automatically. So by having that environment variable, it was like a you wouldn't fall under that trap. But that's all. That was only the beginning. So we feel like right now, there's been a lot of in our release notes we've detailed quite often, like we've got browse module and this is happening, that's happening. So we feel right now, um,
Mm.
I think we think the community is probably a bit more aware of the browser module. So that's one of the reasons we don't need that environment variable. But also the other reason, like you've seen, um, we've now moved that. Well, in a
Mm.
way, implicitly, we moved it into the properties in this new properties. Sorry, options object.
So what
Yeah.
happens if you try to run it without that options object?
Yeah, you will receive an error, mainly saying that well, because there are various reasons that maybe will lead to that error. The error says make sure you have set the browser type option to run browser tests.
Okay.
Is it the same for so I've noticed that here you've specified the executor. Is that also a mandatory option now for users, or can they just specify the option to run it on this browser type, and then set the field value to Chromium, or do they need
Hmm.
to set the executor value as well?
Yeah, so this is a tricky point now because you have to define a scenario, and as of now, to define a scenario, the executor field is mandatory. So the
Mm.
minimum definition would be here, for example, we could remove the iterations because by default it will be one, but the rest, as of now, it's mandatory. We
Yeah.
understand that this is not the best UX right now, and we have plans on improving it. But yeah, I mean, in a normal test, you probably have more complexities and more options and more scenarios, so it's not that big of a deal. But we know that in a very simple test for somebody that tries to run browser tests without knowing too much about K6,
Mm.
it's not the best option, right? So we have plans to improve this and make it way easier.
Yeah. I think we can also maybe argue that this might be okay, because like if if we are moving closer to how, for example, K6 are doing things is the way they are, and in K6 world, if we define a scenario, you do need to have an executor. So I think that's just one of those things that if we also want K6 browser to be, really a big part of K6, then it's one of those like opinionated way of saying, okay, we're in K6 world now. This is, how we do things. So there's like obviously pros and cons for doing this.
Yeah, and just to point out, well, we've already mentioned hybrid testing. So if you were to do hybrid testing, you have to work with scenarios. So
Yeah.
it's quite nice just to being forced to work with scenarios.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to be the devil's advocate here and say that yes, while I always use scenarios when I run like a full load test, initially when I'm scripting something, I never define scenarios. Like when I'm just troubleshooting and stuff, I don't have any scenarios. I don't have any options. So that would trip me up. But yeah, I get that it's like a minor thing. It's just it doesn't take that much effort to just define a scenario with a single iteration, or not even have to define that and have it default to one. But yeah, I'm looking forward to being able to keep doing that.
Yeah. I do have a question. Because on the old way of doing things, so you have Chromium.launch, and like we've done this a lot of times in terms of demoing K6 browser, that we would pass in, the headless option, and then set that to false so that we can see, browser launching. So with the removal of Chromium.launch, how are users gonna, like see, for example, their browser launching if they're just debugging their tests.
Mhm. Yeah, so this is another change, and it's a result of the browser type no longer being exposed in the API. Because previously you would define the headless here, right, on the Chromium launch and some other options. But now this has been moved to the environment. Well, most of these options have been moved to the environment. So now there is a K6 browser headless, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
which is the one that you should set if you want a headless, a non-headless browser, right?
Browser, yeah.
Hmm.
Wait, so what is
There,
the default?
the default is that it's headless. Yeah. So if you want
Okay,
a
good.
headful browser, you have to set the environment variable.
Yep. I think with because you've said as well that we've abstracted this particular browser type, so we've also I guess remove or maybe refactored like the options that has come with it. So maybe we can talk about like, okay, what are these different environment variables going forward? Because you've already mentioned one, which is K6 browser headless. Are
Mhm.
there any other environment variables that users need to be made aware of?
Yeah, there are a few differences. I mean, I think it's good to check out the next release notes because there is like full
Yeah.
detail. But now, from my mind, the ones that have been moved to be environment variables are the headless, the timeout, then the debug option, and then also the argument, the args, and the file. Well, there were a couple of options that allowed you to set arguments for the browser instance, and also another option to ignore some of the default browser instance arguments that we by default set. And so
Yeah.
this also exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So
So
I'm just sharing. So this isn't live yet. So this is gonna be released. Is it next week or the week after
mm,
the updated documentation?
It
I
should be
guess
next
next week,
week.
yeah.
Yeah, it should be next
Yeah.
week.
But yeah, I've noticed that we have the different environment variables. So if people want to I guess set some arguments on how they want to launch, Chromium, they have to use K6 browser args, and then all the other I guess options that they would normally pass as an option within that method, but now they do have to pass it as an environment variable instead.
Yeah, and there
So
are
it's
some
just the
options.
documentation that's not live, but these can already be used, is that right? Or none of this is live yet?
None of this is live. Like this will
Yeah.
be live on the next K6 release, which I think is
Okay, okay.
on Monday.
Monday. Yeah.
Okay, well, it's very close anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Okay.
also
Yeah.
there are some options that are deprecated. I believe the DevTools option is deprecated and the end option. So there are three options that have been deprecated because they were not providing much value.
Mm.
But all this is in the release notes, and we will also, I believe there is a, well, there's some documentation coming, right, Maria, about changes, etc., and migration guide. So
Yeah. Yeah. We'll talk about more about. So we'll talk a bit later in terms of how are we gonna help users migrate, because I know there's a lot of changes. So we're actually working on a migration guide to help you how you can use the new API. One thing that I've noticed is because I remember every time I was stuck with certain browser issue and like timeout, I've noticed that we have an environment variable here. But what about slow mo? So what if I want to slow down my actions? Is that still supported, or are we working on making some changes around that?
right, this is another tricky point then. Yeah, so slow mo. at the moment is not supported, at least in this release. Then this next release, it will not be supported. But we will reevaluate it also based on user feedback. But
Yeah.
the idea is that it will be supported again through a different API.
Yeah. So this is where community feedback is really going to be useful because we, need some actionable, I guess, like feedback, whether or not how we're gonna bring back some of, the options, if if we can. So when it's out next week, yeah, it would be great to see feedback coming from the community.
More than slow mo, what I would really like is to be able to have breaks and just be like, at this point, just pause.
Yeah, like a debugger break.
Yeah, yeah.
I
More
guess
than a slow mo, because that's really what I would be using it for. I want to stop and see what it is at that particular time, and then maybe from that screen then I can open up the inspector and then look for element IDs or whatever without having to do it separately, because right now I have to have like the script and then potentially like a head full script that's running, and then also a separate browser window where I'm replicating the two. If I had a break, then I would just need the one.
yeah,
Sorry
that's
to
a
give you more work. I'm just like taking advantage of the fact that you're here.
yeah, that's a nice feature. You can create a new issue for us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think this one is new, so yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, maybe we can go back to the other changes, Danny.
Yeah, okay. So I believe the last change remaining is, basically these couple of lines that are now removed in the new version, which is basically the launching of the browser and the closing of the browser in the end. And this is a result of just having a single browser instance and single browser context. Well, mainly a single browser instance per iteration. So now
Mm-hmm.
the initialization and closing is automatically handled by us, by the implementation. And as long as you set this browser type option, we will take care of initializing one browser instance at the beginning of every iteration and closing the browser instance at the end.
Mm.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's a.
so yeah,
Oh, sorry. I was just
go
going to
on, Anchor.
say,
Yeah.
it's worth noting that. So in terms of like how much resources like the test run uses, it's pretty similar to how it was previous. But in the future we could optimize. So maybe we only need one browser instance for the whole test run, or we can do some experimentation and make a better use of like the compute resources. So this is quite a nice side effect that we're hoping to
Mm.
also work on in the future.
Yeah. From a user perspective, it looks like, I'll be writing less code as well because I don't have to worry about, closing the browser. I just need to close the page. So that's always good, writing less code.
Yeah, this was a boilerplate code that was very repetitive because it doesn't like it does. You have to do it either way, and so yeah, I think it's good. And also, as Ankur said, we are removing in a way like this delegation that we were doing to the user, and now we can take more actions on how it works under the hood. Right? Like maybe we can reuse a browser instance or reuse the connection or something similar without the user noticing or having to make any change in future releases.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I guess like because a while ago we were talking about this like one view one browser context, and we're not allowing users to create a concurrent browser context. But what if, for example, in the same test, what if I want to open another browser context? Am I limited, or is that still something that we can support, but with some sort of like recommended practice?
Hmm. Yeah, so I think you said the right word, which is concurrent, because you can, for example, you can create one browser context and then close it and then create a new browser context, but you cannot have more than one live browser
Mm-hmm.
context, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for example, here, when you do new page, you are implicitly creating one browser context, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you create new pages, all these will go to the same browser context, right? You could be doing something like context, but new context, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
and then you could be using here this context to create the new page, and then you could, for example, close the context and then recreate another context, right? But you only have one concurrent browser context in the whole iteration. If you have
Yeah.
one browser context and you try to create a new one, you will receive an error.
Yeah. And I think this is why it's key as well to make sure that okay, we are closing the page because um like I guess if a user forgets to, do page.close, are there any like side effects that, can happen apart from like if they try to create a new context, they will, get an error. Are there any other like side effects if they forget to close the page?
Um,
Mm,
I can only think of one in terms of so if the user, if someone forgets to close the page at the end of the test, then at the moment there's a chance that we won't be able to pick up all of the like measurements, like the metrics of web vitals, because when we do a close, we basically flush all those metrics back
Mhm.
uh, back from the browser back to the browser module where we can record them. So that's the only one. But so if a user wants to work with more than one browser context, they don't necessarily need to close that page, but they definitely need to remember to
Mhm.
close the context. So that's but yeah, I mean, it's always best to try and clean up because we're probably doing some things to flush the system. Yeah.
Yeah.
So a basic
Yeah.
question here. Why wouldn't we just close the page when a new one is created? Why do we want people to manually close a page?
I think it's because it's quite explicit in so we're not when you create a resource, so for example a page, we then expect the person who created that resource to handle its lifecycle. So that's why it's up to them to close that page when they don't need it anymore. Similarly with the browser context, it's the same thing. So if they create a browser context, we expect them to close a browser context. But then with the actual Chromium instance, that lifecycle is now handled by us. So they don't own that process anymore. That's up to the browser module to handle. Um, so it's basically like who owns that process or created that process. So we find that model to be a bit simpler to work with.
I guess I'm just thinking that I personally probably wouldn't create multiple browser contexts. I think that's less common, but using multiple pages is pretty common. So I was just wondering, what about if, upon creation of a new page, the previous one is closed or something like that?
Um, yeah, I mean, so at the moment it's valid to have more than one page. So you could open a page, do some tests on one page, and then open a new page. So it's basically like opening a new tab in that same
Mhm.
session. So then
Okay.
you've got two pages, and maybe you're doing some sort of like I don't know,
Mm,
some sort of chat app. So you want two windows open, and you want to test that.
interesting.
Yeah, so that's still a valid use case. Um,
Yeah.
so that's why
Makes sense. Yeah.
we don't close the page.
Cool.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah. Maybe yeah, we can then talk about the other changes because I guess now that we are starting to be um, closer as to when we're gonna integrate K6 browser to Grafana Cloud. I think that's always exciting to prepare us for that integration. Like what other breaking changes have been introduced as part of this release. Like maybe we can talk about some certain parts, so around the web vital metrics, have we introduced any changes around that?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think if
Do you want me
Daniel,
to
yeah, if you
let
don't
us
mind
give
sharing the,
you the intro for the okay?
yeah,
Uh, I will run the new test, okay, with the new version that will be released on Monday. Do you see
Yeah.
it properly?
Yep, we can see it.
Because then we will see other differences, and Ankur will discuss what are they and what are the implications. Okay,
yeah,
so this will be the new summary, and this is how the web vitals look.
yeah. So this, so I don't know if anyone can remember where it was before, but it. So we basically namespaced all of the browser metrics, so you can see that
Mm,
they all start with browser underscore. So it's a lot easier for an end user to see like those browser metrics.
yeah.
Secondly, we kind of rename the web vitals so they follow like the Prometheus best guidelines. So we feel that that's a good way of naming the web vitals. And also, there was actually a misspelling in the last metric of web vitals was one word, but it's actually two words.
Mm,
um, and then, yeah, you can see right just above those web vitals, there's HTTP request duration and failed. Yeah, thanks, Daniel. So they are kind of new and not new. Basically, what we realized is that K6 already has HTTP metrics, and the implementation of how they calculate those measurements is very different to how the browser module um, measures those same things. So we felt that it was better to split them. So now we've got browser HTTP request duration, and if you ran a K6 HTTP test, then you'll see a separate HTTP request duration, and they show two different data points. So that's
yeah.
why we've separated them to two things. Yeah.
Yeah, I think separating it makes sense because maybe one of the confusion that users might have is with the current way of presenting metrics. We have like the HTTP request, like the normal ones that case extracts, and we have the browser ones, and there might just be that misconception that the HTTP ones are just solely focused on the protocol test, but actually that also includes the HTTP requests that were triggered from your browser tests. So to have that, I guess, distinct differentiation, so you can better analyze, okay, these were the HTTP requests that were triggered from my browser test, then these are the measurements, then that makes totally sense. That makes total sense to separate the two. I've noticed though, so I remember we used to show a rating for the Web Vital, but it's now disappeared. So where has the rating gone to?
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. So yeah, the rating was an interesting metric. Basically, it didn't. It was a bit odd for the rating for a particular web vital to be a separate like entity in itself. So
Yeah.
what we did was we made rating a label of like its associated web vital. So if you're looking at the CLS web vital, and you can still retrieve that label, which is rating, and see whether it's labeled as good, needs improvement, or poor. So it I guess that it's more of a fix than an improvement. We shouldn't have done that in the first place, but yeah.
Yeah. That's all good. That's how we, I guess, iterate and improve like as we go along.
Yeah.
Nice. Maybe now, because so we've done a demo of how the new API looks like, how it runs and what the different metrics looks like, especially with the renaming of the Web Vital metrics. It would be great to see, like, how, for example, this K6 browser test would look like if it's running on, Grafana Cloud. So I think the our users would really find this interesting, like how it's gonna work in the future.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I'm sharing a screen now. So I think you should be able to see. So this is, I don't know if anyone's ever seen this outside of Grafana, but this is, it's quite exciting. So yeah, when
Wait, I've
someone,
never seen this. This is
oh really?
awesome.
Yeah, it's very cool. We think it's very cool. And to be honest, we didn't do any of this beautiful front end. This was done by front end engineers, so they get the credit
Yeah.
for this. Um, but yeah, basically, if when you run a browser test, you'll be presented with this new view, and it can be broken down into two aspects. So you can see this top kind of like header, and you've got some of the web vitals here, and below it you've got this scale. And basically, this is like it's not an aggregation. It's basically the 75th percentile of each of those measurements. So if you do like 10 measurements, it'll basically it'll basically show like the 75th percentile, like the measurement, like the seventh measurement, basically, if you do 10 tests.
Yeah.
And you can see this. You might be able to see this little arrow just here, and
Yeah.
that kind of just shows you like how far into this scale this 75th percentile goes to. So with this test run, it's really good. Yeah, it's well within the good rating. And then below it, we've got this graph, which is basically all 5 iterations of the test run, and you can hover over and you can see what the measurements were per iteration, and you kind of get an idea of like how how your front end is behaving. This is a
This
really
is
good view.
amazing.
Yeah, good. I'm glad that it's got rave reviews already. This is great. Um, but yeah, this is great because if you run like a test, with thousands of iterations, then hopefully what you'd hope is like a nice smooth line. But then if you see some like outliers, then you can kind of try and investigate them and hopefully correlate them with some other graphs that you've got in your dashboard. So it's I mean, this is also you have to remember this is the first iteration of this. So
Yeah.
we've got some amazing plans, which is going to just hopefully blow everyone's mind.
We need Doco on this too. I would love for, when you hover over FID or something, it shows like what first input delay is.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
it's
I think if I remember, so I was speaking to our designer Maya, and I think that is in the works because we want to be able to give like extra information as to what that particular web vital metric is. So yeah, I believe that is going to be part of it in the future. Just to add context, because I know here we're showing the 75th percentile. Because if you're a K6 user, you might use the 95th percentile because that's maybe the recommended from a protocol test perspective. But actually, if we're tracking the Web Vital metrics, Google actually recommends tracking the 75th percentile. So this is just aligning as to what Google thinks it's also recommended practice. So that's good to see.
Yeah, that's a good point. And also, one thing that I'm really excited about is that I think maybe 2 years ago or something, even before the Grafana acquisition, there were already talks about having like this whole performance insights thing where we could start having different types of ratings for front end and back end. And to see it finally coming together is like It's really exciting. How do I get this? Is this accessible yet?
Hopefully soon. So I think I don't. I have to be careful here, but I'm just going to say hopefully soon.
I can
So
I
will I
can
hear
see
tomorrow?
Daniel doing this.
No, I'm not sure either. So yeah, better not say anything.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I
but
don't know.
maybe
I
we
heard
can.
tomorrow.
But I think maybe we can give some early access to Nicole like as part of dev environment or like staging environment. Yeah, just so she can play
Yeah.
around with it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that we could definitely do that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
If you're already amazed by this, Nicole, so maybe like we can also talk about what are our future plans is, because like what Ankur said, this is just the first phase. Like we've actually broken it down into different like milestones, because like in the future we want to be able to provide like a drill down view of the different web vital metrics, because at the moment it's just displaying like the aggregate results. So we want to be able to give users that option as well, to be able to drill down, okay, in this particular page navigation, what is my web vital metric? If I click certain actions, is are any of the metrics going to change? So that's one of the things that we want to be able to provide to our users, as well as a visual timeline as well. I for one, I'm a very visual person, so having some sort of like timeline to see how the different actions look like, maybe some sort of annotations that we can provide just to see, okay, this element has the largest LCP, things like that. I think that would be really useful. So yep, we're just excited to even see the first phase, but hopefully going forward we're just gonna keep on iterating and improving the feature.
So I also think that part of this is I'm hoping is going to include a rewrite of the app of the Grafana Cloud K6 app, because if I'm not mistaken, I think that this is still based on the legacy app framework. I think this happened before the scenes framework was put into place. I know that one of the cool things that Grafana scenes added is drill down functionality. So if we switch to that, and it's going to be the future at some point, I think we're going to have to, then having the drill down feature is going to be a lot easier to implement, I think.
Hmm.
Plus also
Yeah.
custom actions. Like, I don't know if any of you have checked it out, but it is so cool. Like, if apps that are based on scenes now, you can start to have these interactions between apps. So, for example, you could go from a K6 test, look at first input delay, and use Grafana machine learning to say like, okay, well, you have a lot of information. Tell me what it's going to look like in the future if things continue along this path. So it's like
Mhm.
interactions between apps. How awesome. When?
Yeah.
Tomorrow?
I will see. But I think yeah, that's really something that yeah, we need to like look in terms of like integration, so that we can better show how K6 also work with other like Grafana products. um there is a question from one of our um like user. So Anchor and Daniel, I'm trying to run K6 browser in a container. How many browser instances per CPU and GB would you recommend?
um, how many browser instances per?
This is like one of those questions that people always want a concrete answer on,
Yeah.
and
Mm,
they always
yeah.
want like 128 exactly. um, I don't know if you two agree. I don't want to overstep, but like from my perspective, it really just isn't that simple to give a clear cut answer and expect it to apply to every possible application that's out there.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
don't know. There's just too many variables. We don't know how complex your application is. Are you taking screenshots? Or is it like a complex user flow? Or are you just going to the page? Are you saving any
Yeah.
part of that page? There's just is it streaming? Are you is it like videos? Is it There's so many different combinations. I don't know if it's possible to have like a rule of thumb here. What are your opinions, Anchor and Danielle and Marie as well?
Yeah, I think this is definitely a problem that we don't have the answer for. Like I
Mm.
guess, well, my personal advice would be, you need to like just measure it yourself, like measure like how much stress the Chrome instance is under, and the Docker container, and also look at like K6 itself. Like, is it doing too much? The load the, well, basically K6 binary, wherever it's installed, is that
Mm.
system also under stress? So you need to try and keep everything below like a certain threshold, and then hopefully you'll have the number based on all those factors.
We went through this very same process actually when we were and the backend team especially, we were implementing this browser farm, and in the end you have to do your test and measure things up and come up with the rule of thumb that works for whatever your setup is.
Sorry, my daughter just she was calling me. Yeah. I guess for me it's the same. Like it's one of those things as well that it's so hard to provide, a concrete answer. So I agree with what everyone has said.
Yeah, I like the approach that Anchor talked about. I think that's the best one. You just make sure that you're measuring things, you're measuring the resource utilization and then adjust from there. I think a good rule of thumb from that perspective is make sure that you're not exceeding 80% throughout majority of the test for CPU utilization and also memory, and then you can just adjust the load and the size up and down, to kind of hit that. But also, I mean, you said container, but like if you're running it within a Kubernetes cluster, one thing that I would definitely do is set resource limits for the pod, because or either that or have like alerts set up so that you know when it's consistently hitting that upper ceiling, because if you are consistently doing so, then it could invalidate the entire test. So I think I understand the need to search for a rule of thumb, but I would recommend that you not use that in lieu of observing your testing stack as well as your application stack.
Yeah. Um I guess just to because like we've already given them like a preview of what our documentation would look like. So you might have, be a bit overwhelmed with all the different changes that we have shown you today. So like, as I've said already, so we're gonna be updating the documentation, so it will be released next week once the new changes to K6 browser have been released as well. And Inanch isn't here, so he's actually creating a migration guide. So he's also one of the developers here in K6 browser. So we're gonna be creating a migration guide, specifically to help you migrate to the new API. So hopefully that will also go out soon. And I think now it's also worth mentioning that we're starting to also prioritize features that were raised by our users, because we want to be able to um, like check like which of the issues are really important to them in terms of using K6 browser API. So if you have any specific or like important use cases that you believe K6 browser should support, then raise it as an issue, and then we'll be able to prioritize it as a team, as well as bug fixes in order to improve the developer experience a bit more. But yeah, I think this was a really great episode just to showcase like all the different changes. I guess in terms of like, I don't know if it's like early to say, but like future plans in terms of the API, is there anything that we can share to our users?
I think, well, like Daniel mentioned earlier, we just hope to try and make things simpler in terms of that big option block.
Yeah.
But other than that, I can't think of anything else. Do you remember anything, Daniel?
No, I think you already mentioned the flashy things, Marie, that are coming, but
Yeah.
I think we shouldn't say too much in public. So that's good.
Maybe the feature that Nicole is requesting.
Yeah.
But it's
Oh, I have so
actually
many. I cannot wait till everything's in Grafana Cloud now. Like I want to run all the things. I want it integrated with synthetic monitoring. I know that's being
Oh,
rewritten
yeah.
to add it to K6. I want integration with Faro. I want to be able to run everything from Grafana Cloud.
Yeah. Oh, you're gonna be spoiled in the future,
I already am.
near future. All right. Well, thank you so much, Daniel and Ankur, for being with us today. And yeah, I think this is it for today's episode. Hopefully, we'll be back again next week. But yeah, thank you again for being with us.
Yeah, it was
All
good to
right.
have you.
All right,
thank
cheers.
Thank you
you.
both. Take
Bye.
care.